How's everybody doing? We're kind of short this morning.
I've always been short.
I was gonna say you guys are all short, but I'm not. But you beat me to it, Callie. Figure where we're at. All right. We're still in chapter 6 of Judges, if I remember right. I didn't think we finished the chapter yet. '27. Number 2. You say verse 27 we finished?
Yeah.
Okay.
I had down here start on 31.
Okay, that's kind of what I thought. We got to the third point, right? Okay, so let's see. We are down to, like I said, verse 28 is where we're going to start. Someone want to read 38 through, or 28 through 35, please.
And when the men of the city arose early in the morning, before the altar of Baal was cut down, and the grove was cut down that was by it, and the second bullock was offered upon the altar that was built. And they said one to another, Who hath done this thing? And when they inquired and asked, they say, He, the son of Joash, hath done this thing. Then the men of the city said unto Joash, Bring out thy son, that he may die, because he hath cast down the altar of Baal, and because he hath cut down the grove that was by it. And Joash said unto all that stood against him, Will ye plead for Baal? Will ye save him? He that will plead for him, let him be put to death whilst it is yet morning. If he be a God, let him plead for himself, because one hath cast down his altar. Therefore, on that day he called unto him Jerubbaal, saying, Let Baal plead against him, because he hath thrown down his altar. Then all the Midianites and the Amalekites and the children of the east were gathered together and went over and fished in the valley of Jezreel. But the Spirit of the Lord came upon Gideon, and he blew a trumpet, and Abiezer was gathered after him. And he sent messengers throughout all Manasseh, who also was gathered after him. And he sent messengers unto Asher, and unto Zebulun, and unto Naphtali, and they came up to meet him.
All right, so as we talked about last week, Gideon was told to go and tear down the altar, which is interesting, as I think Debbie pointed out and Kathy pointed out, was that this was the altar of his father that he was supposed to tear down. And so he's told to do that, and he does it by night. So then verse 28 says, when the men of the city arose, there was the altar torn down, and the image, or the groves, as the King James says, was torn down also. And there the second bull. So they were told to offer the first bull, which he did at night. So they tore down the altar and the god that was there, and the groves, which could be the female god or the trees and the place where they would worship. All of it was torn down, and then they built an altar out of stone and burned all of that wood on that altar, which is interesting because, as we talked about a little bit, when you think about Isaiah talks about the foolishness of worshiping idols, and that wood that they used to cook and to warm themselves and all of that was then also turned into an idol. But here we are seeing Gideon show that this idol was just nothing. It was wood to burn with. And so that first bull was offered, and then as the people rose the next morning, they saw the altar was cut down, all of it was gone, and yet there was a second bull. It was still being offered on the altar. Now, was it that the men were still there offering the bull, watching it burn? I don't think so, because this whole point of meeting at night was because of the fear of his father's servants and the fear of the people. So they did it at night. So what I imagine is they wake up, the altar's gone, the God is gone, and they have the altar still burning with the remnants of the second bowl still on it. And so verse 29 says, they said to one another, who has done this thing? And when they inquired and asked, they said, Gideon the son of Joash has done this thing. So the whole point of Gideon doing this at night was the fear of the people and his father's household. But when they start to inquire about who did it, Gideon's name was brought up pretty quickly. So who told? Who knew? I think the 10 men that he took from his father's house, the servants, spoke and said, well, it was Gideon. Which is interesting because that shows that they were just following their orders that they were given by their owner, master, and yet when the opportunity comes up, they give him away. And so they're upset. Verse 30, the men in the city said to Joash, bring out your son that he may die, because he has torn down the altar of Baal, and because he has cut down the wooden image that is beside it. Okay, so they're upset that their idol, who they worship, has been destroyed by who? Gideon, who is what? Huh? He's a man. So, makes absolutely no sense, right? You have a mortal person who has destroyed an altar, a place of worship, an image of a supposedly immortal person that has more power and control than this mortal man. It makes no sense. And if they had stopped and thought about that, which they're not going to, right? They're going to just continue to be upset. If they had stopped and thought about that a minute, they probably would have said, maybe this was not who we should be worshiping. And really, that's what Joash is going to say. Well, notice verse 31. And Joash said to all those that stood against him, would you plead for Baal? Would you save him? Let the one who would plead for him be put to death by morning. If he is a god, let him plead for himself, because his altar has been torn down. And so he's saying, if Baal is truly a god, immortal being that we should worship, he then would plead for himself, or the idea there is protect himself. He would protect his image. He would protect his altar. And there would be no need for anyone else to do it. And so he's saying, you have these men pleading and upset about this. They really should be put to death because it makes no sense. Joash is using logic here, but then you think about it. Was Joash worshiping this idol? It was his. So it doesn't make any sense. It's smart on what Joash says here, but he himself was doing the same thing. Maybe when he saw this altar torn down, all of this had happened. In his mind, he's going, okay, this is not God.
Well, Gideon had to have learned about God from somewhere.
Yeah, he did. So it could be that Joash, of course, like the most of Israel, worshiped God at some time, but have started to worship idols. And so this was a wake-up call for him to say, wait.
The Lord spoke to him, right, and told him to do it.
To Gideon, yes. Yes.
So it wasn't to Joash.
No, it was to Gideon. And so it could have been that moment for Joash to go, okay, I shouldn't be doing this. I should not be worshiping this God. And so he is using logic. He is using reasoning and going, okay, I understand this now. God, the true God, is out there. And so, he puts that up as a statement. And so verse 31, or verse 32,
But if I'm still dwelling on that, verse 25 though, it says, take your father's young bull. So, it just seems like, the Lord had to say it to him, right?
I don't think so, because verse 27, he feared his father's household.
Yeah, he would be afraid of what God had told him to do. But
Mhm.
in 25, it seems like it's saying that that the Lord said to him, take your father's young bull and told him what all to do.
Yeah, he's talking to Gideon there. He's telling Gideon to take Joash's things, his bowl, and his servants,
Okay, so
and to
I've
do
got
that.
mixed up then.
Yeah,
I get it.
Verse 23, the Lord said to Samuel to Gideon, peace be with you, do not fear, you shall not die.
yeah,
So Gideon built the altar and the Lord called it, the Lord is peace.
yeah. So you would think Joash would be mad because his idol's taken away.
Okay, so I've just got the two swapped their names.
Okay, that's fine. And you would think Joash would be upset because his bull. You think about it. That one bull was 7 years old, and we talked about what was a rare item or commodity during that time. Any type of food. So you have Gideon taking a seasoned piece of his livestock, a key piece of his livestock, and offering on this altar. So you would think Joash would be upset, but he's not. He actually stands up for Gideon and gives that logical statement. And then in verse 32 it says, therefore on that day he called him Jerubbabel, saying, let Baal plead against him because he has torn down this altar. And so the name given to him, it means let Baal contend. And so we don't usually think about too much of the meaning of names today, right? It may have a significance because of family or things like that. But during that time, they would use names for events or things that happen. You think about one of the worst ones for us, you would think about, but Hosea. He had to name his children names that were against Israel. And so that talked about their demise and their wickedness, and that was the name of his children that were given. And so, here's the meaning of what he did, and it's going to follow him because chapter 7, it starts out Jerubbabel, and so that name is going to follow him. And it's really a great name for him to have, Baal contend, because he showed the people that this altar, this God who they worship, was false. And everywhere he went with that name, they would have understood that. When his name was said, and it's really going to be big when we get into chapter 7 because of the army that he's going against, they're afraid of him. And so they worshiped Baal, and to have Gideon's name be Jerubbabel, it's going to bring fear in their hearts because of that also, because God's on his side.
So here's a cool explanation for Gideon's dad having this idol be, it makes me kind of think of back to Lot with Sodom and Gomorrah. He was there in that wicked city, and because of that, some of the things that he did weren't the greatest. Like, so I'm wondering if this idol was like, hey, I have this idol so that people will leave me alone, or was he actually worshiping it?
I don't know. We can only imply, basically. We're
Because
just
he
told.
had no problem telling them in verse 31 or 30 that this is ridiculous.
Yeah.
He had no problem saying that to them.
I don't know. It doesn't tell us. All we can do is speculate on why. I don't know. It's interesting. It's interesting to see that. Now, a piece we didn't really talk about was he has servants, and he has several servants. So it says a lot about his father. He was wealthy.
Yeah.
And so, he could have been a prominent person in his community. I don't know. There's just a lot of things we don't really are told about. But we can say this is pretty neat on what Joash says here. And so verse 33, it says, "Then all the Midianites and Amalekites, the people of the east, gathered together, and they crossed over and encamped in the valley of Jezreel." And so here's the oppressors, and they're moving to fight against Gideon and his people, which the Midianites are the oppressors. But notice it says here, the Amalekites also. And so we have these two people, or two groups of people, that do not like Israel, and they're joining forces together. And so they go to the valley of Jezreel. I have a long statement in there. You can read that in your notes. That's talking about the valley of Jezreel. And so really, this is, as we've talked about in this valley here, it's also called Escalon Valley. It's also known as the Valley of, or the Megiddo. The premillennialists want to believe that that's where the last battle for earth is going to happen, is in Megiddo, and is in that valley, because there was a lot of battles that happened in that valley. And of course, that's not true. It's just figurative language in the book of Revelation. They understood that that was a place of a lot of battles in their history, and so that's used in the book of Revelation in reference to that. But this is the valley that they're going to fight. And so, verse 34, it says, "But the Spirit of the Lord came upon Gideon, and he blew the trumpet, and the Abiezrites gathered behind him." And so the Spirit of the Lord comes upon Gideon. And it's interesting, Kaufman says, in the Hebrew language, this phrase is literally interpreted as the Spirit of the Lord clothed himself with Gideon. And so this is similar to, do you guys not have this copy? Oh, okay, sorry. There was an extra one back there, maybe it's gone. In the Hebrew language, it's really focused upon this, the Holy Spirit has clothed himself. The idea of that is that it's really overtaking him. And so the only other times we've seen this is it's similar to Acts chapter 2, when the Spirit of the Lord came down upon the apostles, and they spoke in tongues and in languages that they did not know. And so that is what's going on here. The Spirit of the Lord has fallen upon Gideon and is guiding his steps and guiding the things that he is doing next. It would give him courage. It would give him wisdom. And so then it says, then when he blew the trumpet, the Abiezrites gathered behind him. The Abiezrites were the eldest son of Gilead in Joshua 7 and verse 2. This kind of seems to be the family of Gideon. So as Gideon starts to go to fight, his family jumps in with him. They are standing up with him to fight. And so then verse 35, it says, "And he sent messengers throughout all of Manasseh, and those who gathered behind him. He also sent messengers to Asher, Zebulun, and Naphtali, and they came to meet him." And so, like we talked about, these are a lot of the nations that were on this side of the Jordan, and then also the half-tribe of Manasseh that was on this side. So, of course, this is our oppression area, and this valley, they're now in this valley, so they've crossed over the Jordan. We talked about that at the beginning of the chapter, and they're fighting up here. So he's pulling all of the people from these tribes in this area to come and fight with them, and they do, which is good. All right, any questions on that section of passages or comments? All right, let's go to verse 36. Someone will read that through the end of the chapter, please. 36 through 40.
So Gideon said to God, "If you will save Israel by my hand, as you have said, look, I shall put a fleece of wool on the threshing floor. If there is dew on the fleece only, and it is dry on all the ground, then I shall know that you will save Israel by my hand, as you have said." And it was so. When he rose early the next morning and squeezed the fleece together, he wrung the dew out of the fleece, a bowl full of water. Then Gideon said
All right, so something that we keep seeing with Gideon is what? Every time he's told to do something, what? Hey, yeah, testing God. He's making sure what he's being told is true. And we've talked about this the first time, and it's not going to be the last time he does this. And matter of fact, when we get into chapter 7, God's going to not even give him the opportunity to say that he needs a sign. He's going to say, go down to the people if you have any fear, and you'll be fine after that, basically. I'm paraphrasing. And so, Gideon asked for a sign before. God gave him a sign, or to the angel, which was, as we talked about a second, the Godhead. And here he's wanting it again. He's wanting a sign. Is that wrong for him to question or to want a sign to confirm what he is to do? I don't think so. In some parts we could say, well, if he knew it was the Lord talking to him, he shouldn't question God. But then we also think about he's doing his job to make sure what he is doing is right and the correct thing to move forward. Is that not what we do in our daily life? We don't take the word of, me preaching or whoever is standing up here preaching or teaching class. We don't just take their word for it. What do? Make sure. As we study the Bible and we, over time, we have a pretty good understanding of the scriptures. We don't have to search everything that is said, but yet red flags pop up in our mind when we hear something that seems odd, something we don't really understand or agree with, and so then we go study it and make sure it's true. But Gideon's doing that. He's saying, I want to confirm what you're saying. And so his test here. So if Gideon says, if you will save Israel by my hand, as you have said, look, I shall put a fleece of wool on the threshing floor, and if there is dew on the fleece only, and it is dry on the ground, then I will know that you will save Israel by my hand. So the first test was, I'm going to take this fleece, and when we get up in the morning, everything is going to be dry except for that fleece. Okay? But think about this. Kaufman says this. Tulaski, which is, I don't know who that is, tells of fishermen who lived on barren islands which had no streams or available fresh water. Yet their need for water was satisfied by placing fleeces on the rocks and in the morning wringing the water from the fleece. So what does that tell us about fleece? Yeah, catches condensation. It can be very wet. Okay, so it's very absorbent to water. So it'd be like a sponge or whatever the case may be. So the first sign of it being covered in moisture and being full of moisture that he could wring out, that is believable to say, okay, in a normal situation that could happen. The dew could have burned off for the rest of everything else, and that fleece is still wet. But notice the second thing. So he rose the next morning, and he wrung the dew out of the fleece in a bowl of water. Then Gideon said to God, do not be angry with me, but let me speak once more. Let me test, I pray, with this fleece. Let it be dry by only on the fleece, but on the ground let there be dew. So that's really more powerful of a miracle, right? You know that the fleece is going to absorb water. But if he wakes up the next day and it's completely dry and everything else is wet, then that's definitely a miracle. And so, of course, verse 40, and God did so that night, and it was dry in the fleece only, but there was dew on all the ground. And so Gideon is now confirmed in what he is told. And we get into chapter 7, he doesn't question God at all. The only time is when he doesn't question God. God gives him the opportunity to be full of courage by hearing something being said. But I think all of this leads up to chapter 7, because what God is going to have him do in chapter 7 in a normal human's mind would be crazy. It doesn't fit our logic. And we don't see Gideon questioning God at all. He says, okay, and just does it. And so, any questions on chapter 6? Nothing? All right, let's start in chapter 7, and let's see. Won't read 18 verses at once. Let's do 1 through 6. Does somebody want to do that, please?
Then Jerubbaal, who is Gideon, and all the people that were with him rose up early and fished beside the well of Harod, so that most of the Midianites were on the north side of them, by the hill of Morah in the valley. And the Lord said unto Gideon, the people that are with thee are too many for me to give the Midianites into their hands, lest Israel vaunt themselves against me, saying, Mine own hand hath saved me. Now therefore go to proclaim in the ears of the people, saying, Whosoever is fearful and afraid, let him return and depart early from Mount Gilead. And there returned of the people 22,000, and there remained 10,000. And the Lord said unto Gideon, The people are yet too many. Bring them down unto the water, and I will try them for thee there. And it shall be that of whom I say unto thee, This shall go with thee, the same shall go with thee. And whomsoever I say unto thee, This shall not go with thee, the same shall not go. So he brought down the people into the water, and the Lord said unto Gideon, Every one that lappeth of the water with his tongue like as a dog lappeth him, shalt thou set by himself. Likewise every one that boweth down upon his knees to drink. And the number of them that lapped, putting their hand to their mouth, were 300 men, but all the rest of the people bowed down upon their knees to drink water.
All right, so Zerubbabel, as we talked about, verse 1, is brought up again. Means fighter. It means, it means, as we talked about, let Baal contend. And so his name is used there. It says, and all the people were with him and rose early and camped beside the well of Harod. This is not Herod spelled as in the New Testament, right? So the Herods are not a thing at this time. The Herods come from the Idumeans that lived within the Israel nation who proselyted in. And so this is just Herod. We don't know who this is, but it's just a well that was near Jezreel, which is the valley that they're going to be fighting in. And so here he is encamped in that area around this, in this valley of Jezreel. And the Midianites were on the north side of them by the hill of Morah in the valley. And so then verse 2, it says, and the Lord said to Gideon, the people who are with you are too many for me to give the Midianites into their hands, lest Israel claim glory for itself against me, saying, my own hand has saved me. And so it's interesting, God has said, okay, your army is too big. You need to be smaller. Okay? What is human logic when you go into a battle? Yeah. The bigger the army, the better, right? The more people, the better chance you're going to have to win. And so, you know, this first thing for Gideon, he knows that this army is large. So I'm going to read Judges 8 and verse 10. Okay, so there was 120,000 that had fallen. This is the battle. There was 15,000 left. There was 135,000 people of this army. So you have, when this started, his army was 32,000. Okay, so Gideon's army is starting out at 32,000. The other army is 135,000. That is 4 times the size of Gideon's army already. And God says, you're too small, or you're too big. And it's interesting because when you get down to where they go to the camp of the people, it's talked about their horses and their people, they were like the sand of the sea. This army was spread out through so far that you couldn't even see the end of it. There were so many people. And so why would God do that? Why would God reduce the army? Okay, show his power. And he says that there. If I leave it to be a massive army, and which really they're not a massive army, okay, they're most of the time that they're going to end up losing in that kind of situation. Someone that was very skillful at having a small army and taking on a massive army and winning was Alexander the Great. If you look at a lot of his battles, he was always outnumbered for the most part. He would go into a battle, but he was good at strategy, and so he would end up defeating 2 to 3 times the size of his army. And so, you know, you could say, okay, Gideon is very strategic in how he fights, and so, you know, this battle was won because of his strategy and their might and all of their strategy, whatever the case may be. But God says no, because who has fought for them every time they've fought in a battle? God. God has already told them, I have delivered them into your hand. And so here's another case where he is saying, your army's too big, because if I let you stay that big, then the people would say, well, it was because of my own hand that we were saved. It was because of my own strength and my own will and determination that we won. And so they were going to be reduced. And so the first thing that we see in verse 3, it says, now therefore proclaim in the hearing of the people, saying, whoever is fearful and afraid, let him turn and depart at once from Mount Gilead. And 22,000 of the people returned, and 10,000 remained. So he says, if you are afraid to fight in this battle, they know that this army is huge. They're encamped along this valley. They could probably see them already. They're going to be afraid. And when he says, if you're afraid, you can go back, 22,000 out of 33, or 32,000 left. And somebody read Deuteronomy 20 and verse 8. All right, so we see this happen before, where God says, if you're fearful and afraid, you can leave. Why? The text tells us there. Their fear is contagious, right? If you get a group of people that are fearful, they can affect a lot. Have we seen that before? Where have we seen the fear of a few affect a massive amount of people? The 12 spies, or 10 spies. The 10 that come back and are afraid made 2+ million, 2 to 3 million people get scared. To where there was only 2 spies, Moses and Aaron, that said, we can defeat them. Or Caleb and Jacob. Yeah. Caleb and Joshua, and Moses and Aaron, because of course Moses was on God's side there. But those 2 spies, Joshua and Caleb, they couldn't affect in the way of saying, hey, we can defeat them. And so fear is pretty easy to be contagious. And so there's the case here, okay? Well, if you're going to be afraid, you're going to affect the rest. So 22,000 of them left. As before we move on, think about this. The size of this army, most of the time when we see a battle in the past throughout this time, they're always smaller than the other team, okay? Is that a theme throughout Scripture? Of the little guy, the smaller might, the smaller power physically looks like, is taking on a lot greater number of enemy. Yes. Think about the New Testament times. You think about the two paths in Matthew chapter 5. There is the narrow path with their few are on, and you have the broad path that are many on. The narrow path, yes, may seem physically small in number and can be easily defeated, but who's on their side? God is. God is on our side. And so it doesn't matter our numbers. We could be 1 against 1,000,000,000 people. If God is on our side and God is determined that you are going to win, you're going to win. And so, because God is ultimate power. And so we see that here with his army. This army is going to be reduced again. And so notice, we're about out of time. And notice verse 4. It says, "But the Lord said to Gideon, the people are still too many. Bring them down to the water, and I will test them for you there. So then it will be that if that of whom I say, the one that go with you the same shall go with you, and whoever I say to you, this one shall not go with you, the same shall not go." So he brought the people down the water, and the Lord said to Gideon, anyone who laps. And so if they went down to the water to get a drink, and they lapped like a dog, so they stuck their tongue out and just kind of tried to drink the water, they were going to be removed from the army. But if the man went down and scooped with his hand and drank, then that man would stay in the army. What is significance of, you think about it, of a person lapping like a dog or one scooping the water up in his hand? Yeah. The man that is scooping the water is looking around as he's waiting or as he's drinking. The other one has no clue what's going on around him, can be taken out. And so there's a significance to that, I think. But it was a test, and of course, 9,700 of the men were not watchful. And that left 300 men to fight.
I did some math because my brain wanted to know. The first time, the army was 10 times bigger when the 13 times bigger when the 10,000 remaining. This time it's 440 times bigger.
Yeah.
That's like, that's insane.
It is. 300. They're going to take on 135,000. And so that's a pretty big gap. There's the story. There's a movie made on it, but there's a story in the Greek culture, and I'm pretty sure it happened. But there was 300 men that stood up to fight against Artaxerxes as he was coming in, which we talk about who Artaxerxes is, which is Esther's husband. But he was trying to fight and work his way into Greece, and the 300 men fought against him, but they lost. They killed a lot of men, but they lost. This 300 is not going to die. They're going to defeat. And so we're out of time. We'll pick up here in a couple weeks. Next week I'm going to be at Foundation, so we'll not be here. So it'll be the following week that we get back to this. So any questions, comments? All right, thank you guys for your time.
What verse are you stopping at?
We're going to talk a little bit more about verse 6, but we'll come back to that.